Welcome back. Now, China has accused Indian troops of a deliberate provocation over the deadly clash at a disputed Himalayan border. Foreign Ministry spokesman Li Chao said the Indian troops had crossed into the Chinese territory and attacked, triggering fierce physical conflict. But he did not give details of any Chinese casualties. Li Jian said Indian forces made provocations in an attempt to unilaterally change the status quo of control management. He said the Chinese border troops were compelled to take necessary measures to respond to the situation on the ground. Rejecting India's claims, Li Jian said the Galvan Valley is located on the Chinese side of the line of actual control. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in the clash in the Galvan Valley. Now, India's opposition parties have strongly criticized Prime Minister Narendra Modi over the government's failure during a standoff with China in Ladakh. A day after the All Parties Conference, prominent opposition leader Rahul Gandhi says Modi has surrendered Indian territory to China. In a tweet, Gandhi asked Modi to tell why and where Indian soldiers were killed. Shiv Sena's deputy leader Priyanka Chaturvedi said the centre must respond to China's claims over Galvan Valley sovereignty. Modi is facing strong criticism after killing of 20 Indian soldiers during a clash with Chinese forces in Ladakh. It was the biggest military confrontation between India and China in over 5 decades. Now, the number of COVID-19 cases in Brazil has crossed 1 million after a record 54,771 new infections were reported in the past 24 hours. The death toll in the country is nearing 49,000, with 1,206 fatalities overnight. In the United States, 678 more people have died, taking the toll to over 119,000. While globally, the death toll has exceeded 459,000, while the infections have crossed 8.6 million. More details in this report.
Especially in the regions of America, South Asia, and Middle East. Mexico's death toll has surpassed 20,000 after 647 new fatalities, while it recorded over 5,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Authorities in Mexico City have delayed a planned reopening of the economy. In the U.S., Oklahoma's Supreme Court has rejected a petition asking everyone to wear a face mask at President Donald Trump's rally in Tulsa this week. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned the world is in a dangerous phase of the virus and must follow precautions.
The world is in a new and dangerous phase. Many people are understandably fed up with being at home. Countries are understandably eager to open up their societies and economies. But the virus is still spreading fast. It is still deadly.
Over in Italy, the National Institute of Health says sewage water from 2 cities contained coronavirus traces in December, long before the country's first confirmed cases. In the UK, chief medical officers have agreed to lower the COVID-19 threat level 1 notch.
The COVID-19 alert level across the United Kingdom has moved down from level 4 to level 3, as recommended by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. The chief medical officers for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have reviewed the evidence and agree with this recommendation.
Elsewhere, South Korea has reported a record 67 overnight cases in about 3 weeks. Officials say 31 of the new cases came from overseas, while the rest were locally infected. Meanwhile, China's capital Beijing has recorded a further drop in new infections as tightened measures to contain the spread remain in place.
Pakistan has recorded its highest single-day death as 153 people died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, raising the tally to 3,382. The Health Ministry said 6,604 new cases have been reported since yesterday, bringing the total count to over 171,000. The ministry said over 63,000 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far, while there are nearly 104,800 active cases in the country. It said the province of Sindh has reported over 65,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 64,000 cases so far. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced to partially open the country's airspace for international flights. Khan said the decision is being taken for the well-being of overseas Pakistanis who are stuck abroad due to the pandemic. India has recorded its biggest single-day surge in coronavirus cases, with over 14,500 infections reported overnight. The new cases have taken India's total number of infections to over 395,000. India has now become the 8th worst hit country as its death toll rose by 375 to nearly 13,000. Officials say there are over 168,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. They said the recovery rate from the virus in India is at 54.12%. The health ministry says major cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai are badly affected. Moving on, the Taliban say they are committed to the Doha peace deal signed with the US in February. This comes after CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie said the US has fulfilled its obligations by reducing its troops in Afghanistan to 8,600. In an interview, the group's spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid said the US should not be concerned as the Taliban were committed to the deal. He said Afghanistan's soil will not be used against anyone anymore. Earlier, General McKenzie said a full US withdrawal from Afghanistan will happen if conditions are right. As part of the deal, the Taliban agreed they will not allow any violent group to use Afghan territory to plan or carry out attacks on the US. The February deal calls for all the US and foreign troops to withdraw from Afghanistan by mid-2021. China will set up a national security agency in Hong Kong to oversee a new law aimed at cracking down on violence in the city. State media said the law will override any existing Hong Kong laws that may conflict with it once it is implemented. It said the city's leader, Carrie Lam, could also appoint specific judges to hear national security cases. China's parliament endorsed the planned legislation last month, sending the draft to the Standing Committee. Earlier, China lamented the UN Human Rights Chief's Michelle Bachelet's remarks on Hong Kong, deeming them an interference in Beijing's sovereignty. Earlier, Bachelet called for a judicial oversight of the implementation of such legislation. Now, South Korea has expressed regret over North Korea's plan to send anti-Syrian leaflets across the border and demanded an immediate end to it. In a statement, the Unification Ministry said the act would be a clear violation of the Inter-Korean Agreement. It said Seoul would deal sternly with civic groups that send anti-Pyongyang leaflets into the north. The ministry urged North Korea to halt measures that could aggravate the situation. It also urged Pyongyang to make efforts towards the development of inter-Korean relations and the peace process on the peninsula. On Tuesday, Pyongyang blew up a inter-Korean liaison office after tensions between the two countries escalated in recent days. Moving on, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has ordered his army to be ready to carry out any mission in or outside the country. He said the decision has been made to protect the national security amid tensions over Turkey's intervention in neighboring Libya. El-Sisi toured an airbase near Egypt's 1,200-kilometer-long western border with Libya. Speaking to the airbase staff, Sisi said Egyptian army is one of the strongest in the region. He said the country's army is a rational force that protects and does not threaten. Earlier, Libya's Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj arrived in Algeria to discuss the ongoing conflict in his country. Now, in Libya, the UN-recognized government says it will boycott talks on the Libyan conflict being held by Arab League next week. The video conference talks were called for by Egypt, a key supporter of the renegade commander Khalifa Haftar. In a statement, Foreign Minister Mohammed Tahir Siala said that the planned meeting would merely deepen the rift between Arab states. Siala said there had been no prior consultation with his government and said the meeting's virtual format is not suitable to address the issues. The government of National Accord has been in the dominance since the Turkish-backed forces defeated a year-long offensive by the Haftar's troops. Libya has been mired in chaos since the 2011 uprising that toppled and later killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Palestine says the UN has adopted a resolution calling for accountability for any assault on human rights in the country's territories occupied by Israel. In a statement, Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said the resolution by the mission of Palestine won 22 votes of UNHRC member states. Al-Maliki said 8 member states voted against the resolution while 17 abstained. He hailed the supporters for their commitment to accountability for violations of international law. Al-Maliki accused Israel of increasing assaults on the Palestinians' rights amid its US-backed plan to annex portions of the West Bank. The resolution calls on all states to ensure they do not become involved in internationally unlawful conduct. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, Turkey says it has hit over 700 targets of Kurdistan Workers' Party so far as part of its Claw Tiger operation in northern Iraq. During a visit to the Regional Operations Center, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkey has destroyed 150 caves and seized large amounts of ammunition. Akar said over 160 improvised explosive devices have also been eradicated in the area. Yesterday, the Defense Ministry said Turkish armed forces neutralized 4 more terrorists as part of the operation. Turkey launched Operation Claw Tiger and Claw Eagle this week to ensure the safety of people and the borders. Now, Iran has criticized the UK, France and Germany for their opposition to lifting a UN arms embargo set to expire in October. In a tweet, Iranian Foreign Minister Jawad Zarif said the E3 must stop public face-saving and admit their failure to fulfill the nuclear deal duties. Zarif described the E3 as accessories to the US and Israel. He said the European powers have failed to fulfill their own JCPOA duties due to a total impotence in resisting the US bullying. Zarif said Iran has always behaved with full transparency with the UN nuclear watchdog. Earlier, foreign ministers from Germany, France and the UK said Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile tests remain a serious concern for Europe. The 3 countries also opposed the planned lifting of the UN arms embargo. The United States says Washington and Moscow will meet in Austria early next week to discuss the future of arms control. The U.S. State of Department said Special Presidential Envoy Marshal Bellingsley will meet with Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. The department said the U.S. has also invited China to join discussions as it wants all 3 countries to pursue arms control negotiations. President Trump has repeatedly called for China to join the U.S. and Russia in talks on arms control agreement to replace the New START Accord. China, estimated to have about 300 nuclear weapons, has been rejecting Trump's proposal. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow is ready to discuss problems of activities in outer space with the United States. Russia says many Western politicians mistakenly believe that Washington can rule the entire world. In an interview, Director of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Naryshkin, said any country that tries to rule the world all by itself will end in disaster. Recalling World War II's lessons, Naryshkin said there are ongoing attempts to distort the public opinion about wartime events. He said many young people from Western countries believe that the US on its own defeated Nazi Germany and liberated Europe. Last month, the White House published a video of a memorial with an inscription saying the US and the UK defeated Nazism. Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow is outraged by US attempts to belittle the Soviet Union's contributions into the victory over Nazi Germany. Now, the Council of the European Union has decided to extend economic sanctions against Russia over the illegal annexation of Crimea. At a news conference, German Chancellor Angela Merkel criticized Russia for not taking sufficient steps to implement the Minsk agreement. Meanwhile, in a statement, Estonia's Foreign Minister Urmas Reinsalu said the decision demonstrates bloc's unwavering support to Ukraine's integrity. He said violation of international law has consequences for the aggressor. Reinsalu said the move is important as Russia is trying to take advantage of the pandemic to deepen its aggression towards Ukraine. The EU introduced sanctions against Russia after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the restrictions have been repeatedly expanded since then. Moving on, thousands have taken to the streets across the U.S. to demand racial justice on Juneteenth holiday that marks the end of slavery in the country. In Washington, D.C., protesters tore down and set ablaze a monument of Confederate General Albert Pike. In Atlanta, protesters marched on the Georgia state capitol while demonstrators gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Over in North Carolina, two activists toppled two Confederate statues erected on the ground of the state capitol. Meanwhile, one of three police officers involved in Breonna Taylor shooting is set to be terminated, while the other two remain on administrative reassignment. Elsewhere in Oklahoma, veteran civil rights activist Reverend L. Sharpton criticized President Trump during a rally in Tulsa. Sharpton said Trump failed to address the racial gap in the United States.
The president said he was coming on June 19th. Didn't know it was Juneteenth Day. Well, let me say something. He was born and raised in New York, where 2/3 of New York is black and Latino. So if you didn't know about Juneteenth, it was because you were so insensitive and isolated. If you did know, you were lying. Either way, you're not qualified as someone culturally deficient to address this country as a head of state.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Trump says the proposed mail-in voting poses the biggest threat to his re-election. In an interview, Trump said his campaign's legal efforts to block expanded ballot access could determine his political fate. He said if his campaign loses these lawsuits, it will put his re-election chances at risk. Trump also warned the Republican Party not to abandon him, saying the Senate candidate should cast his support base aside at their own peril. The president's remarks come as states across the country are trying to accommodate remote voting due to the coronavirus pandemic. Trump's campaign has long argued that widespread mail-in voting will benefit Democrats and invite fraud. The European Parliament has voted to reaffirm the slogan Black Lives Matter while denouncing racism and white supremacy in all its forms. The resolution strongly condemned George Floyd's custodial murder and criticized President Trump for threatening to deploy the army against protesters. It urged EU capitals to denounce the disproportionate use of force and racist tendencies in law enforcement. The bill also prompted EU institutions to officially acknowledge past injustices and crimes against racial minorities. Earlier, the United Nations Human Rights Council unanimously condemned the acts of police brutality and called for a probe into systemic racism. The resolution called for Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet to prepare a report on systemic racism and police violence. Over to Mali, where large crowds have once again poured onto the streets of Bamako demanding the resignation of President Ibrahim Boubacar. Mali's newly formed alliance of the main opposition parties and civil society groups organized the demonstration. Protesters demanded political reforms, condemning the president's mishandling of many crises plaguing the country. Demonstrators also sang the national anthem and displayed placards bearing anti-government slogans. Militant violence, a tanking economy, and government's alleged corruption have fed the anti-Keita sentiment. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died, and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes as violence in the country has increased fivefold since 2016. Saudi Arabia is set to end a nationwide curfew from tomorrow after 3 months of lockdown to curb the spread of coronavirus. State media said restrictions will remain for religious pilgrimages, international travel, and social gatherings of more than 50 people. In March, the kingdom introduced strict measures to curb the spread of the virus, including 24-hour curfews on most cities. In May, it announced a three-phase plan to ease restrictions on movement and travel. In recent weeks, the number of infections has risen following a relaxation of movement on May 28th. The kingdom has recorded more than 154,000 cases of COVID-19 and a total of 1,230 deaths. Saudi Arabia also plans to limit numbers at the annual Hajj pilgrimage to prevent further outbreak of the virus. Pope Francis has made his first public appearance for a group of people since Italy lifted its coronavirus lockdown. Speaking in Vatican's frescoed Clementine Hall, the Pope said health workers are one of the supporting pillars of the entire country. He said he is interpreting everyone's sentiments by paying a vote of thanks to the health workers. Italy returned to relative normality on June 3rd when its citizens were allowed to move between regions again. Nearly 35,000 people in Italy have died of the coronavirus, the fourth highest number in the world after the United States, Brazil and Britain. Now, for Syrian refugees crossing Turkey to enter Greece is a huge task as they face Greek authorities pushing them back. But even once they somehow manage to enter Greece, their problems are far from over. More details in this report.
28-year-old Syrian Mohammed Al-Farhan arrived in Greece through a boat from Turkey in 2017 and lives in a tiny apartment in Athens with his wife and 2 kids. He got asylum late in 2019, but his recognized refugee status comes with new responsibilities. Al-Farhan must find a new accommodation and a job because his support programs as an asylum seeker have come to an end. He has to leave his apartment at the end of June. Finding a job is hard enough under the country's current economic situation, but under the lockdown, it is impossible.
The thought of having to leave our house, it would be horrible. Very bad for us. We came out of a war that destroyed us emotionally, and leaving the program will destroy us further because we will end up in the street. Imagine being on the streets with your children and your family.
In an effort to speed up the asylum process, the government has processed some 23,000 applications in just March and April alone, despite the lockdown. Refugees who have been granted asylum are leaving islands such as Lesbos for Athens. Migration Ministry General Secretary Manos Legatidis says refugees in Athens need to make way for newly arriving asylum seekers. He argues while being asylum seekers, recognized refugees were aware that their assistance will end and they were given time to prepare.
There needs to be a way for them to deal with their daily lives. The answer is surely not for the state to support them in every aspect of their daily lives. That would be institutionalization, which is what we want to avoid. We want to give them the opportunity to make the next steps in their lives which they have chosen.
Family reunification schemes with EU countries and the transfer of unaccompanied minors have picked up after the ease in lockdown last month. But Logothidis says the EU states need to share the burden even further.
In Brazil, the lagoons in the seaside capital Rio de Janeiro are filled with couches, toys and tires. Even pandemic could not take the edge off the pollution. Up close, the waters are murky, thick and sewage discarded furniture and old toys. More in this report.
The dolphins and sharks sleeping and swimming in Rio de Janeiro's Guanabara Bay belie a dangerous problem of contamination. Pollution is an old problem of Brazil that has plagued the Bay and Tijuana and Jacarepagua lagoons. The recent worldwide pause and lockdowns of coronavirus pandemic has less impact on pollution reduction. The recent worldwide pause and lockdowns of coronavirus pandemic has less impact on pollution reduction. Today, it remains littered with garbage, bottles, plastic bags, lids, shoes and tires.
Here, because of the lagoon system in the Jacarepagua lowlands, a neighborhood that borders the Jusa lagoon, the problem is garbage and sewage. People have not stopped going to the bathroom because of the pandemic. Now they go more because they are more at home. So the problems remain exactly the same, and unfortunately the garbage is still in the rivers.
Fishermen say there is a resurgence in marine life due to lockdown, but the pandemic appears to have made little dent in the pollution. A fisherman, Jesus Coutinho, works on the bay. He believes the coronavirus pandemic has largely helped worldwide environmental efforts.
This pandemic, on one hand, killed a lot of people, but on the other hand, it made a good contribution to nature.
According to statistics, Tijuana has 6.5 million cubic meters of mud and garbage, which grows with each new rain.
This is a garbage deposit where part of the population throws everything into the rivers and the rivers end up like this.
According to the Baya Viva environmental movement, pollution affects some 100 coastal lagoons of Rio de Janeiro state coast.
Pakistan says durable peace in Afghanistan is important to a respectable return of Afghan refugees to their homeland. In a message on the World Refugees Day, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan has been generously hosting millions of Afghans for decades. Qureshi said Pakistan renews its call for adherence to the principle of global burden and responsibility sharing. He said the World Refugee Day is a yearly reminder of the importance of peace, prevention and resolution of conflicts. Qureshi said the devastating impact of COVID-19 has compounded the vulnerabilities of those already displaced by violence and conflict. The foreign minister said Pakistan looks forward to a positive response to the UNHCR's appeals for Afghan refugees and host communities in Pakistan. Business news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. 7 major European investment firms have threatened to pull money out from Brazil over the surging destruction of the Amazon rainforest. The rising threats from investors show how the private sector is taking global action to protect the world's largest rainforest. The firm said they will divert from beef producers, grain traders and even government bonds in Brazil if no progress is made on the issue. Deforestation of Brazil's Amazon surged to an 11-year high in 2019 and has risen a further 34% in the first 5 months of 2020. The right-wing populist has weakened environmental protections and called for more mining and farming in the Amazon region. However, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has shrugged off diplomatic pressure on the matter. Now it's time for the weather update. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.